The question then is that Mr Hanson's amendment to Mr Gentleman's amendment be agreed to. Ms Lauder.
I'd like to speak to Mr Hanson's amendment and Mr Gentleman's amendment. I'd like to thank all members for their comments and make a few general remarks about some of the debate we've had so far. Firstly, with regard to the planning to a referral to committee, it would appear from the petitions presented earlier this morning that there may well be some work for the committee there anyway. So I feel that it's important for us to consider that it's relevant and useful to refer this matter to the Planning Committee. And as a member of that committee myself, I can assure you all that I have no concerns about an additional workload in regard to that, because that's, in my view, exactly what we're here for, is to address community concerns. It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to actually, put your money where your mouth is, and I'm quite prepared to do that. I could refer you to other instances where committees in this place have undertaken their work amongst other heavy workloads and in very short timeframes, and one example of that was the inquiry into the eradication of the loose fill asbestos insulation, which was undertaken by the Public Accounts Committee in a very short and tight timeframe. It was a lot of work, not just for the committee, but for the Secretariat, and a lot of pressure put on people in the public to make their submissions in a short timeframe as well. It was a lot of pressure for everyone involved, but when you have important issues, it's important to address them. We've had quite a bit of discussion, a number of people talking about public housing, and you'll see from the original motion, the intent was to discuss the planning and the zoning laws and whether it's appropriate to put public housing on CFZ zone land. It was not intended in any way to be a debate about public housing or public housing tenants. My husband was a public housing tenant for 25 years. When I first arrived in Canberra, the first, in fact, only person in the street we moved into to come across and say hello and have a cup of tea was the single mother across the road who was in a public housing property. And I was friends with her, and my kids were friends with her kids for years. And in a way, I don't mean this in a rude way, but in a way, big deal. That's Canberra. That is Canberra. We have public housing all through our suburbs. We all know people, if not are those people ourselves, who've grown up or lived in public housing. Big deal. They are people just like you and I, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, our colleagues, our aunts and uncles. They do have, as Ms Berry talked about this morning, they do have the same goals and aspirations as us. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to maintain the community facility zones, because they have the same aspiration to have community facilities in their vicinity, just as I do, instead of taking them away for premises, for residences. So, and Ms Lakuta made the point, and someone earlier referred to the fact that people were heard in silence, and I've listened in silence to Ms Lakuta, so it might be nice if I had the same courtesy extended to me.
Members, no interchange across the floor, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ms Lakuta referred to the fact that she thought there was a bit of a tone to my motion about the deserving and the undeserving. Actually, that tone goes back to that 2005 committee inquiry that decided that supportive housing would be allowed on CFZ zone. That wasn't my decision. That goes back well over 10 years. It's not the tone of my motion. It's actually the tone of the committee inquiry as to who may be able to be accommodated in CFZ zone land. So I didn't actually appreciate that aspersion that it was the tone of my motion saying there was a deserving and undeserving people. That's nothing, it was not my decision. What I'm looking at is whether this 2015 change, which I believe, and many people who've spoken to me in the community believe, substantially changed the territory plan. And I'll read to you from the FOI documentation. I'm sure you can all see that there's a lot of information redacted here. There's not a lot of text that's left. There's a lot of black spaces throughout the documentation, the information that the government doesn't want us to see. But back in 2015, April 2015, this is from a meeting, a Public Service Directorate meeting of the Public Housing Renewal Task Force, and it says, potential exists for development of portions of existing sites in established areas designated community facility. A number of these sites have overlays excluding supportive housing and no site allows general residential use. The Territory Plan currently limits residential development on community facility land to supportive housing. Confirmation is being sought as to whether this definition can include public housing. The use of community facility zone land would require the Environment and Planning Directorate to support a Territory Plan variation. So, you know, it was quite apparent to the department that a change was required. Furthermore, on the 10th of September 2015, and this goes to the comments we've all talked about, including Ms Lakuta this morning, at another meeting of, I think, the same committee in September 2015 talked about the definition of community facility zone development code providing for the development of supportive housing on community facility sites, and that the Territory Plan only permitted people who are older or had a disability to live in supportive housing. Again, not my decision and not my tone, Ms Lakuta, but it's existed for a long time. But it does say, this definition fits with the purpose and use or allocation of public housing as administered by Housing ACT, and goes on to say, community objection to the use of community facility land for the public housing renewal program is likely. It's anticipated that there will be strong opinion regarding the loss of quantity of unleased territory land designated for community use. A proactive and strategic communication and engagement plan will be required for these sites. Oh, I think that's exactly what we've all been saying this morning and has not happened, despite the fact that it was flagged a year and a half ago by the Directorate as being required. Instead, it's been done very quietly and with no consultation whatsoever. This is what the amendment to my motion is trying to achieve, that there's proper scrutiny, there's proper accountability, there's proper transparency, and there's the opportunity for members of the community to understand what's going on with regard to this community facility zone land. So that's why, despite the fact that Mr Gentleman's amendment brings in quite a bit of discussion about public housing, which was not the intent of my original motion, with the addition of Mr Hanson's amendment referring it to committee, is why we're prepared to support the amendment to Mr Gentleman's amendment, because we do all support public housing. We do need to support vulnerable people in our community because they are our people and we are those people. We're not against public housing. What we want to do is make sure that the community is involved in these decisions and have the opportunity to have their say, not feel like they've been shunted aside and their views ignored. It's not about public housing. We would be having this discussion if there was a proposal to build a defence installation on community facility zone land, a hazardous waste facility on community facility zone land, a liquid fuel depot on community facility zone land, or indeed on residential zone land. Go back to what I started with earlier this morning. We have zoning laws for a reason. Let's use them as they're intended to be used. And for that reason, I support Mr Hanson's amendment to Mr Gentleman's amendment to our motion.
So the question is that Mr Hanson's amendment to Mr Gentleman's amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells. I understand there's at least one pair in play. Mr Dospot and...
just reserving her right. No. Yes.
Unsuccessful no to mixed women.
And
then
we'll go back to the motion.
I don't know whether Nicole's depends what the Greens are. Or is it against?
Are you looking to close after this, or do you want to? Yeah, before lunch. How much time do you need? Okay. Make sure you get it right.